Well, I want to welcome everybody here today. It's the new year, so we're all struggling with temptation. We've all made those New Year's commitments, and here we are. There was a man that was on a diet, and he was trying to avoid sweets. But one morning he went to work, and he had a whole box of donuts with him. And so one of his coworkers said, "Well, what are you doing, man? I thought you were trying to avoid that stuff." And he goes, "Well, I'll tell you what happened." He said, I was driving by this donut shop and I thought, if God wants me to have a donut, He's going to make a parking space open right in front of that donut shop. And sure enough, on the 8th time around the block, I've always had a sweet tooth of my own, but my harder temptation isn't that. It's keeping my mouth shut, right? That's always been mine. I don't know if you're like me, but in 2017, I was working at a church in Tulsa, and every once in a while, the fire marshal would come in and he would, inspect the building, and I had a real good joke about fire marshals. But I don't know if you know any fire marshals. They're not always the most happy-go-lucky, smiley people on the earth, So I really battled. Man, should I say it? Should I say it? Well, he walked into my office, and I said it. And so I said, "Hey, bud," I said, "do you know what the difference is between a fire marshal and God?" And he looked at me. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't, He said, "What?" And I said, "God knows that He's not a fire marshal." He did not smile. He did not laugh. He did not chuckle. And he just pointed to my mini fridge and he said, "That's got to go." And he walked out. We're in a series called Curveball, and it's the story of Joseph. And this week we get a kind of a spicy curveball. If last week was the curveball of bitterness, well, this week is going to be the curveball of temptation. And Joseph's story is one where it starts out that he's a favored son, right? But then he gets a curveball whenever his bitter and jealous brothers sell him into slavery. So up, then down, and then, but he's not sold just to anybody. He's sold to the captain of the guard, Potiphar, a very high up official in the government, and so he's entrusted with everything. So he's back up again, and then in his story, he's going to get another curveball here, and he's going to be brought low. And specifically, it was the curveball of sexual temptation. And this particular temptation, sexual temptation, has just destroyed so many families and hurt so many people. And isn't it interesting that this curveball, it goes all the way back to the beginnings of time. And so what that means is that if you have been tempted by sexual temptation, you are like everybody on the planet. But this particular temptation has so much power to destroy like few other temptations have. Just last week, I don't know if you saw, but there was a news story that broke out that a few people at Fox Sports had engaged in sexual activity for their own sexual appetite, and then also to further the career of one individual. And it worked until it came into the light. And now their lives are a mess, and their families' lives are a mess. Sexual immorality is so dangerous that some people have falsely taught that all iterations of the flesh are wrong and evil, that anything to do with the physical nature is wrong. But C.S. Lewis illustrated it really well talking about a fire and a fireplace. A fire has a lot of power. It has a lot of potential, right, for both good and bad, and we've seen that in the news recently. See, fire inside the fireplace has the power to bring warmth and life, right? And sexuality inside the context of marriage has the potential to bring intimacy and connection and even life, right? But when that fire gets out of the fireplace, then we see what happened, as we see in the news, right? The Palisades are just getting burned to the ground and lives are being ruined. Well, sexuality outside the confines of marriage will leave us with regret. So let's pick up the story if you got your Bibles, I want you to turn to Genesis chapter 39. And if you don't, there's on the screen, or there's probably a Bible there in front of you in the pew. But Genesis chapter 39, look in verse 1. It says, "Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of the Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there." Now skip down to verse 4. "Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything that he owned. From the time he put him in charge of this household, not all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So Potiphar left everything that he had to Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food that he ate." Wouldn't that be nice, right? That you come home from work and everything is just taken care of for you, right? The lawn is manicured and mowed straight, right? The taxes are done, right? The painting project that you have, not your problem, right? The water problem in the basement, taken care of. All of that is done. All you have to decide, all you have to worry about is, do I want lasagna or meatloaf tonight? That's the only thing that this guy had to worry about with Joseph. But not only was Joseph good at his job, he had some other things going for him as well. Look in the next part of the verse. It says, "Now Joseph was well built and handsome." Right? Many of you guys know the burden of being beautiful, right? I didn't have any girlfriends in all of middle school. Now, hey, you're take it off, man. I didn't call for that yet. He's stealing my thunder here. As you can see, I didn't have any girlfriends in middle school, and I didn't have any girlfriends even in high school. It took me all the way till the second semester of my high school years before I finally got a girlfriend. And it wasn't because I was just, some Christian who didn't date girls, or something like that. No, I wanted them, But then, okay, now you can go ahead and put that up there. Boom. That is what is called female repellent. Right there. Axe body spray, they were running those commercials that said, if you just spray this on you, you'll get all the girls. Well, I called to complain. And they said, hey, man, even our product doesn't work for that offensive projection right there. Needless to say, the curveball that came next in Joseph's story has never and will never happen in my life. So look in verse 7. It says this, "And after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, 'Come to bed with me.'" And look where it says right here that his wife took notice, right? His wife took notice. And this right here is a trap, okay? Rick Warren is a pastor in California, and he talked about some of the warning signs that we have. And these traps are out there for us, and so we can identify some of these traps based on some of these things. The first one is flirtatious looks, right? We can identify some of those whenever people are looking at us or we're looking at them with those flirtatious looks, and those are the things that we think about. We find ourselves thinking about them, all day long. But it's also flattery. They tell you what you want to hear, right? She tells you that you are so funny, right? Or that she really just respects you, right? Or he tells you that you look really, really nice and how interesting you are. Now, look, sometimes people are just being nice, okay? And not everybody that says that you look nice is trying to get in bed with you, okay? I get that, right? But sometimes these can be warning signs. And the last one would be inappropriate touch, touching his hair or her leg, holding his arm or embracing, right? Ecclesiastes chapter 3 says, there is a time to embrace and a time to refrain. And do you know when the time to refrain is? The time to refrain is whenever you are attracted to that person, but you are not married to that person. And so that is going to be a time to refrain. So back in Genesis chapter 39, look in verse 8. It says this, but he refused. With me in charge, he told her, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house, but everything he owns has been entrusted to my care. No one is greater in the house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you're his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. One day, he went into the house to attend his duties, and none of the household servants was inside. She caught him by the cloak and said, come to bed with me. But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. The very first takeaway that we find in this text is this, to pause and think about what's at stake. Look in verse 8 and 9. It says that that Potiphar had put his trust in him. He said, Potiphar has trusted me with everything here. There is relationship here. He has relationship there with Potiphar, and he said, look, that's going to destroy that relationship, and you are his wife. You have relationship with him, obviously, as well. Sexual purity, it deepens relationships, doesn't it? Sexual purity deepens relationships, but the opposite is true as well. That sexual immorality destroys relationships. The same story happened with Arnold Schwarzenegger. I don't know if you remember this story, where he did not pause and he did not think about what was at stake. And he locked the door and he went to bed with one of his household attendants. And she got pregnant and there was a child. What happened? Well, his wife, Maria Shriver, she divorced him. And he lost his wife. And then his relationship with his kids got very complicated after that. And he would go on later to say that he had deep regret for the pain that it caused him and his family. There's a lot on the line. And if we only think about it logically, don't you wish that we could just think about this stuff logically? It just doesn't make sense, does it? There's a lot on the line, and for what? A few moments of gratification. There's no doubt that if we could see what would happen before we locked the door, there's no way that we would risk that. When we pause and when we think about what's at stake, we are not at risk of being the person that only sees clearly after the consequences come. Look, I was a youth pastor for a long time. So parents, let me give you just some helpful tip whenever it comes to your kids. Help your kids see it for what it is, right? Don't give them a rule to follow, right? Don't look at that. Don't do this. Don't get a girl pregnant, right? Don't give them just a rule to follow, because what do teenagers like to do with rules? Break them, right? Don't give them a rule to follow. Give them a picture to see. If we show them the picture, if they see it for what it is, then guess what? They might decide on their own, man, I don't want to end up like that. Guys, as a pastor, I have the opportunity to speak to a lot of people, and see, honestly, a lot of broken lives. And man, every chance I get, I will take those generalities home, and I will help my own kids see, man, this is what happens. This is what happens whenever you choose poorly in this area. Man, I want them to see that. I want them to feel that. I want them to know that they, whenever they are encountered with that they are going to pause, and they're going to know, they're going to have a picture to see, not just a rule to follow. We want to help them see. In 1 Peter 3:7, and this is a verse that, guys, I promise you, Because there's a lot here, 1 Peter 3:7. There's a lot to mine out of this. And so we'll come back to this one at some point in the future. But look at what it says. It says this, husbands, in the same way, be considerate as you live with your wives. Treat them with respect. Look at that word, respect. As the weaker partner and as heirs with you of the gracious gift of life, so that nothing will hinder your prayers. Well, that word respect there it literally means honor. Treat them with honor. And so, I don't know about you, but whenever I was in high school, the question was, where is the line, right? Where is the line? How? And so if you can find out where is the line where sin is, right, then what's the next question? How close can I get to the line without sinning? What can I do without sinning? That's the natural question that we have. This verse teaches us different to say, let's not, because anybody who walks the line, what happens eventually, right? They fall over the line. You cannot tightrope that line forever without eventually stepping off and falling and breaking your ankle, right? There's going to be consequences if you approach sexuality that way. The better question that Peter teaches us to say is, it's not where's the line, it's how can I honor her? How can I honor him? So is crowding the line the best way to honor her? Is crowding the line the best way to honor him? No, obviously not, right? And so it teaches us to ask better questions. Andy Stanley always said it this way, purity paves the way for intimacy. Isn't that true, right? Purity paves the way for intimacy. And if you want to have the best marriage possible, right? And we all do, right? I pray for my kids every day. And I think I've told you guys this before. You remember whenever your little kid, whenever you were not paying attention to them, what would they do with your face? They would squeeze your cheeks like that and make you pay attention to them, right? Whenever I pray for this, for my kids, for their future marriage, their future spouse, I picture myself squeezing the face of God and saying, pay attention to me on this one. Please give them a fantastic spouse and help them to be a fantastic spouse themselves, right? Because as you know, giving your life to God is it's the most important thing that you'll ever do. But what's right behind that? It's who you marry. It's who you marry. Purity paves the way for intimacy. And so we want that for our kids. And so we want to give them a picture to see. And did you notice that he said in the question, in verse, where am I? Chapter 39, he says, how then could I do such a wicked thing? He said, Potiphar has given me trust. He's given me all these things. And so then he says, how then could I do such a wicked thing? And then he says, and sin against, what's the name? I mean, I didn't expect God. I expected Potiphar, right? How could I sin against Potiphar? But he was right in that when we sin sexually, we harm our relationship with God. Sexual sin is unique. In 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 8, or 18, it says, flee from sexual immorality. He says, flee, get rid of it. And we're going to see this in the life of Joseph. Flee, right? All other sins. Isn't that interesting? He says all other sins are in a different category. He says sexual sin is unique. He says all other sins a person commits are outside the body, but whoever sins sexually sins against their own body. What he's saying there is that sexual sin impacts the core of who we are. It's not just physical, is it? Sex is not just physical. Ask anybody who's been the victim of abuse, of sexual abuse, and you say, well, if it's just physical, then just get over it. When you're healed, you should just move on. It's not. It's emotional. It's spiritual. So even if nobody else is visibly hurt, we hurt ourselves by diminishing the sacredness of our bodies and our relationships. But look back in verse 8. Look at what he says. He says, but he refused. The next takeaway is this. Just run from it. Just run from it. The battle is always won or lost when? It's in the beginning. It's in the beginning. This means that he was acting out of a conviction of something that he had already decided. Man, we don't win the battle of sexual temptation when we try to have that dialogue when we're fighting against it. We have to decide right now, right? We have to commit ourselves right now. That's the only time that we can be strong, right? You don't walk into sexual temptation kind of having like, well, nobody's going to find out. Nobody. And so he ran from it. In verse 11, it said that none of his household servants were inside. Oh, man, the trap is set. No one is around, and no one will know. Nothing is going to happen, right? Guys, is that not the temptation? Is that not exactly what Satan says to us? No one's going to know. No one's going to find out, and nothing's going to happen. Enjoy yourself. No one's going to know. No one's going to know. That is the temptation. Who is saying that? It is not Jesus. It is not God. That's Satan. Here's something helpful that has helped me in my life. Imagine yourself 20 years from now, that guy, okay? What does he say to you right now? Does he say, no one found out, no one knew, and no one got hurt? He's not saying that. She's not saying that. She's saying, run. They found out. People got hurt, and there were consequences. Just imagine yourself speaking and looking into your eyes right now. Listen to that guy. Listen to that girl. Now, I know running away doesn't sound very courageous. I hate feeling chicken. I don't like it. I don't like that we call it a men's retreat, right? That sounds so weak, right? We should call it a men's advance. Sean, can we do that next time? In high school, whenever somebody would play chicken, in the cars, you know what I'm talking about? If somebody ever played chicken with me, all right, I was the guy that would never budge. I was going, and if they didn't move, we had a crash, right? What I thought was courageous was just plain old stupid, right? Nobody walks up to that crash and says, man, Brian sure was courageous. No, they say, Brian is the dumbest idiot that Texhoma has ever produced, right? Some things are worth running from. Sexual temptation, sexual sin is worth running from. Someone said an alive dog is better than a dead lion. And look in verse 10 where it says, and though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. This is absolutely key right here. Remove yourself from the temptation. Not remove the temptation. I'm sorry, but you're just never going to do that. You're just never going to. You cannot stop temptation. It will find you no matter where you go. But you don't have to stay in it. There is no human that can withstand constant temptation. I had a friend that was struggling with pornography on their phone. And so after a while, they traded in their phone for a flip phone, right? That's making it inconvenient right there. There was another couple that lived in a cul-de-sac, and the wife and the husband were there, and the wife, she always thought that this girl a few doors down was attracted to her husband. And the husband's like, no, she's just nice. You know how we are, we don't always pick up on it, and he said, nah, she's fine, Well, at some point down the road, this lady called the husband to come over and help her with something. So he did. Good neighbor. So he goes and he knocks on the door, and she answers in a bathrobe. They put up a for sale sign the very next day, right? That's making it inconvenient. You don't have to stay. If you know there's danger, you don't have to stay there. And you'll have to run again and again. Look back in verse 10. It says, she spoke to Joseph day after day. This temptation will never stop knocking on your door. It just won't. When I was in Indiana, we had a neighbor kid that he came over all the time. And I mean like all the time. He would come to the door even before my own kids were awake. And so then I would send him home. But 5 minutes later, he would be back. But this time he wasn't knocking on the door. He just walked in, right? And he'd just start playing with the toys. We'd send him back. And then 5 minutes later, he was in my garage pulling out my power tools. And then now it's time to go, dude. I had to put cameras up all the time just for this kid. He was just knocking on my door all the time. And don't you wish that temptation could just be conquered once and for all and just be done? But it doesn't happen that way. And the rest of the story happens like this. He runs away and he leaves his coat, right? Don't lend your coat to this guy, right? He loses a lot of coats, doesn't he? And she keeps it and uses it to create a false accusation against him. And I think it is interesting that this is the second time in the scriptures that his clothing was used to bring a false report about him. But in Genesis chapter 39, look in verse 16. It says this. She kept his cloak beside her until the master came home. Then she told him this story. That Hebrew slave, and then what she said, that you brought us. It sounds a lot like Genesis, that woman that you gave me, right? That Hebrew slave that you brought us came to me to make sport of me. But as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and he ran out of the house. When his master heard the story that his wife told him, saying, this is how your slave treated me, he burned with anger. And Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. Now, here's the deal. First of all, she starts to blame Potiphar and puts him on the defensive and says that, maybe he's at fault partially. This girl is a manipulator from the beginning to the end. But then it says that he burned with anger. And I just wonder if it's not so much that he burned with anger at Joseph as it was that he burned with anger against his wife. Why? We can't know this for sure, but the reason, because she had just questioned his motives. She's accusing him. And he knew, obviously, he trusted Joseph. He trusted Joseph with everything he had. He knew that he was a trustworthy guy. And add that to the fact that he's about to lose a competent servant and his wife's knowledge of his knowledge of his wife's character, or the lack thereof it. She put Potiphar in a tough spot because he can't just do nothing. He can't overlook it. That would shame her and his family. But he likely knew that it wasn't true. And I think he probably knew what was up, because we have to assume that if he believed her, what is he going to do to Joseph right there on the spot? He's probably just going to kill him. But he doesn't. Now, he does put him in prison. Okay? But it's not just a dungeon. It's not just any prison. It's the king's prison, which is the most posh. It's prison, but it's the most posh prison that there is. You are treated extremely well in this prison. So Potiphar does the minimum that he has to do in order to keep his honor, but he still saves Joseph. So let me end with this. Can I just end with a few more quick but helpful points when it comes to sexual temptation? First of all, if you have struggled with sexual immorality, that is now the norm. Now, that's not to say that we're sweeping it under the rug or anything like that, but it is the norm. It is just too easy. I don't have my phone on me, but it is just too easy to just click, and there it is. I mean, it is the norm now. So don't allow Satan to isolate you and tell you that you need to hide it, that you're some kind of weirdo, right? That nobody else is struggling with. So here's what we do. We have to, and I think it all comes down to this. If you want freedom from this, we have to rewire our brain. And the first thing is confess and repent. Winning this battle is all about rewiring our brain. And when we do that, when we bring the issue into the light, right? When we confess it to God. First of all, we must own it. We must confess it to God, right? But then secondly, confess it to somebody that you look up to in the faith and that you trust, right? I don't think it's helpful to confess it to the world. I don't think it's helpful to do that. But it is helpful that when you confess it to someone that you look up to in the faith and that you trust, it brings it into the light. And Satan loses power whenever it's in the light. And he is still strong if it's kept in the dark. And listen, don't give up. In terms of addictive sexual immorality, relapse is common. The temptation to think that you can never win is real. We get these ideas. We've been here before. We sin and we, man, I'm sorry. I'm committed. I'm never going to do that again, right? But then we fall again, and then we get trapped again, and then we go through that cycle, and then there's this temptation to think that we're just never going to win. And then the temptation is that we can just give up. Just stop resisting. Because what's the point? Stop coming back to church. Stop praying because God doesn't want to hear from you. Right? But I want to tell you something. So many people have freed themselves. So many people have broken the chains. It is possible. I promise you, it is possible. Rather than giving up because of your shame, confess the mistake and recommit. If it's your first time, get up, recommit. If it's your 100th time, get up, recommit. If it's your 1,000th, be the guy, be the girl that if you get knocked down 100 times, that you're getting up 100 times. And accept the grace. Listen, if you are a Christian, that sin is paid. The first sin was paid. The second one was paid for. The 100th, the 1,000th, it is paid. Jesus did not die on the cross if you only sinned X amount of times. He knew what you were going to do, and he loves you. He's still about you. There's nothing, no amount of sins that you could commit over and over and over that he would not love you. Now, does he want you to change? Absolutely. Is he going to give you the power to change? He does want to do that. But I promise you, if you are struggling in this, he loves you. Accept the grace 100 times. You are 100% forgiven. The second one is this: rewire your brain by connecting to God regularly. I've spoken to so many people over the years who have been struggling with this, and they just tell me it's just got a grip on their life. And one of the questions I'll ask them is I'll say, hey, listen, kind of a side question here. What did you read in the Bible today? And they're like, well, I hadn't read today yet. Okay, well, what did you read this week? Or what did you read yesterday? Well, I'll just be honest. I hadn't really been reading yet or recently. Okay, well, what did you pray about today? Well, I know I should be praying, but I'm not. Guys, listen. God offers us the power to break free from this if we remain connected in the vine. Remain in me and I will remain in you, he says, right? Listen, when we connect to God, when we are reading his word and we are praying to him daily, it rewires our brain and it gets us out of the flesh and into the spirit. It is impossible. Let me say this. I think it's almost impossible to break free from this if we're just constantly living in the flesh. But when we take our minds and we're focused on Christ, redemption is possible. We can break free, but we've got to rewire our brains by connecting to Christ through his word and through prayer. And the last one is this: rewire your brain by practicing self-discipline. The more often that you resist temptation, the more you weaken the neurological pathways in your mind associated with that addiction, and the stronger you become to resisting that temptation. Listen, confession rewires the brain. Connecting to God rewires the brain. And when you put those together and you add it to self-discipline, that's where the magic really starts to happen. I have a friend who was an alcoholic for many, many years, and just the other day he posted that he has now been free of this for 18, not days, not weeks, not months, 18 years. And at first I think, man, first of all, that's amazing. But second of all, after so long, why is it still important for him to count the days and the weeks and the months and the years now? Do you think that he's going to ruin 18 years for one drink on New Year's Eve? No way, because it's not worth it. Let me tell you something. When you find the strength from confession and connecting to God, and you find the strength to resist temptation for 4 weeks, now you got something going here. And then 2 months, and what I think, in my opinion, is 3 months. If you can go for 3 months, now you've got something that's happening. And what's happening in your mind? You are beginning to rewire your mind, and then temptation grows weaker. Unfortunately, it'll never go away. It'll never go away, but it does lose its grip on us. Let me end with this. There is a ripple effect in our lives from all the decisions that we have ever made. We moved here, we did this, we accepted this job, we married this person, or we looked at this. There is a ripple effect for all the sin that we have in our lives. Every sin does carry with it consequences. It just does. And there is a ripple effect from this. Potiphar's wife made some poor decisions here. And it not only affected her, but the people around her. I want to say this. Just as it's true that our sinful decisions have a ripple effect, so do our righteous decisions. We saw that Joseph made a decision, a righteous decision, to refuse, to reject, and to run. And that decision, as we go on through this story, you're going to see that that decision had a ripple effect for not only him, but other people as well. I want to tell you this. If you have messed up in this area, yes, there are ripple effects. There are consequences. Let's just own it. Let's just be honest. It is never too late to start doing the right thing. And if you will choose righteousness now, the ripple effects will come. You in 20 years will look at you, and she is saying, thank you. It is never too late to do the right thing. Let me pray.